What I did remember was my time crossing the U.S.-Mexico border. I crossed the Sonoran Desert 3 times. We were caught twice, and until the 3rd time we made it. And that, I think, was less traumatic than my time through Mexico. So now I'm like trying to go back through that. And this is a new poem. Observations at night in Guadalajara. A Central American climbs on top of a tree, crows a few branches down. He hangs from inside a sheet, blue like the flag. Behind the branches, the dark blue sky without parakeets walking like old men. One day, the tree grows fast. All the trees grow fast. The grass too, understandable. Guadalajarans are no normal humanoids. They eat nopales, punctual train stations, air-conditioned buses, nicely asphalted roads, unlike the previous San Salvador, hot-headed dogs. But this is also not the place to merge into workforce permanently. Concentrate vos. Adapt their órale sing-song. Concéntrate. Órale. Órale, carnal. Give me the lana. There must be someone to show off my new accent to. So we're different, and I will go full salvi. This poem, I'm from a very small coastal town where, like many coastal towns or towns in Latin America, we have our resident drunks, and my town had like 4 of them. And one of them I was really close to, and he would stop in front of my grandma had a pupuseria in front of a clinic, so he would always come by like at 4 p.m. to ask for water. And what you need to know, I guess, y'all probably seen Rocky Balboa, the original. And then Sylvester Stallone also had another movie called Cobra, in which he's a detective. And this drunk, his nickname was La Belleza, which means the beauty, which is a dope-ass fucking nickname. And he had a saying, and the saying that he always said was, ponele queso, bicho. And that literally means put cheese on it, kid. So this is for La Belleza. And it's a 4-year-old me talking to La Belleza. Why you post on my fence and wait for water, Belleza? You don't know? I'm Rambo. Look at these muscles. They shine like death. Va. Call me Silvestre Escalón. It's pronounced Silvestre, Belleza. Silvestre Estalón. Come mierda, bicho. I made the best desk. I had a shop. Ponele queso. Every night I cut where branch meets trunk. When you gonna make me a desk then? I made desk. Ponele queso. You know what that means? When I die, my phrase is gonna be on TV. It'll be like Silvestre in that movie Cobra. He'll try to figure what that shit means. Puta bicho. I'll be famous. It's Silvestre, Belleza. And yes, I know what it means. What it mean then? Sounds like those maces with the cheese in the middle and a rat outside. Va, 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 va. You do use that coconut. I knew you were your father. You knew my father? Don't touch the tiger's balls. I made the smoothest desks. Ponele queso. It's all in the smell, bicho. Did my father say that? You're touching the balls. You're touching the balls. But look, it's something like when you go to the store and vodka is 2 colones, right? Right. The label says 80 proof, but rubbing alcohol is 1 colon, 200 proof. So I'll wait for you to bring water. What does that mean? Look, I was passed out when he got in that van. He had a backpack. You were asleep. He didn't want to go, but the dólares and war, bicho. Ponele queso, and the rat won't leave. And I rarely read this one, but apparently Trump is gonna make a fucked up announcement tomorrow around asylum. I just got the Apple News. And so this poem, which is the last poem in the book, is around I think immigrants, we always remember our birthday and also the date in which we crossed, which every immigration form always asks you for. And my date was June 10th, 1999. And every time that comes around, it's like a weird anniversary. And so I wrote this poem trying to talk about how I got here and how I crossed. June 10th, 1999. First day inside a plane, I sat by the window, like when I ride the bus. Correction, when I rode buses. Below the border, I sat by the window, attention to dogs under a mango, trash under parked cars, drunks passed out. I sat by plane windows, same afternoon I crossed desert the third time. Was not nervous at white people at terminal, all those questions. Did not cry, did not stop looking out the window for Statue of Liberty, Golden Gate, Disneyland, Miami. We were lost and didn't know which star was north, what was east, west. We all dropped out of the van too soon to remember. Someone said the sun rose east. We circled so much we had no maps, and the guide we paid twisted his ankle, was slowing us down. We couldn't leave him. Why? Asked the ones who walked ahead. Whispered they had heard coyotes fake their hurt, circle and circle so much they make it seem they try, but all they did was steal money. I don't know. His ankle was swollen. He was feverish, it's true. The sun's heat was a reptile, but I know if we hadn't left him, we would still be run over toes. I didn't recognize Dad, different from pictures. He remembers the smell, shit, piss, dust in your hair, he says now, crying. Mom had a bag with Nikes, Levi's Star Wars Episode 1 shirt. I left my ripped clothes inside a Ross fitting room. I'm tired of riding the fence, the desert. The van picked us up, took me to parents. I'm tired, it's always that. Even now, outside United Airlines 18F, I see clouds first like quilt, then like cheese, melting in a plastic bag under creosotes next to those empty gallons of water. Mom didn't know. Dad didn't know. Even if they had run across fences before, they didn't see my knees crashing into cactus needles that night one shoe slipped off. She says, Coyote said, I'll carry him to your front door myself, Pati. She didn't know 110 degrees when like Colorado River toads we slid under bushes. Officers yelled, on your fucking knees. You couldn't have known this could happen, Mom. You couldn't have. No es su culpa. No lo es. I wasn't born here. I've always known this country wanted me dead. Do you believe me when I say more than once a white man wanted me dead? A white man passed the bill that wants me deported, wants my family deported. A white man, a white man, a white man. Not the song I wanted to hear driving to the airport today. The road, the trees, the signs, the sky, the cars, the walls, the lights told me, we want you out, 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 out. A few hours ago, I boarded a plane, tried to cut ahead with Group A. Usually, I'm not caught. I was stopped. The flight attendant told me, wait, it's not your turn. I started sweating. I wore white, the worst color for sweat, my back drenched, until she let me through. I was in the gate, in the plane, 18F. When I got to SFO, I took Marin Airporter to San Rafael. Same bus I took when I first saw the Golden Gate. I had never dreamed of it then, waiting in that line at the U.S. Embassy when I tried and tried for a visa, like mom, like dad, like aunts, and we all got denied. Javier, can you think of that date without almost pissing yourself in La Migra's backseat? And in front of you, people running fast as we could. Now I walk toward dawn only when I'm fucked up. And if I'm blacked out, I want to shut the fuck up those brown strangers who didn't listen and ran from migra guns. But now in San Francisco, I'm half drunk at 8 a.m., stuffing shirts, pants, socks into my carry-on as if I had a flight today. I've carried this since that day. I'm talking about the flor de sote in our fens, the awan abuelita plucked mixed with eggs. That dawn, she was crying. I didn't know why. Come out of the house, abuelita, please. I'm soft, Grandpa says, who to this day goes out with his bad knee to the fields and scrapes the grass, hunching down, raking to blast the leaves on fire. And what do? I sit here, type, it's Monday, it's Tuesday, it's Friday, type, first day inside a plane, I sat by the window, everyone is working, mom, dad, Tia Lupe, Tia Mali, working under different names. I sit here writing our names. The TV is on, coffee is on, the couch is soft, my throat is dry and sick, and still nothing has changed. And I'll end with this other one about, for a long time, while I was a student sitting in a similar chair to yours, I didn't have papers and I couldn't qualify for any federal grant or FAFSA or anything. So for a while I was very depressed, and I thought that the only time that I was going to return to my country was in a coffin, like a lot of undocumented immigrants. So this is my 19-year-old dramatic poem, and it's titled Instructions for My Funeral. And these are instructions for when I die, so all of you are invited. And there's a lot of Spanish. The end, they're all flowers. Como tú is a reference to a poem by a Salvi poet by the name of Roque Dalton. And Estero de Jaltepec is the bay where I grew up. And then we'll open it up for a panel. Instructions for my funeral. Don't burn me in no steel furnace. Burn me in abuelita's garden. Wrap me in blue, white, and blue. A la mierda patriotismo. Douse me in the cheapest gin. Whatever you do, don't judge my home. Cut my bones with a machete till I'm fine as dust. Wrap my pito in pennies so I dream of pisar. Please, no priests, no crosses, no flowers. Steal a flask and stash me inside. Blast music, dress to impress. Please be drunk, miss work y pisen otra vez. Bust out the drums the army strums. Bust out the guitars guerrilleros strummed, and listen to the war inside. Please, no American mierdas. Carouse the procession dancing to the pier. Moor me in a motorboat. De veras que sea una lancha driven by a 9-year-old son of a fisherman. Scud to the center of the Estero de Jaltepec. Read como tú and toss pieces of bread. As the motorboat circles, open the flask so I'm breathed like a jacaranda, like a flor de mayo, like an alcatraz. Then forget me and let me drift. Thank you. Now, panel time?
Panel time. The panel's going to have a discussion, and then we'll have some minutes at the end for questions from you all. I guess first, if you all could introduce yourselves really quickly. All of us actually are UC Berkeley graduates. So Plinio Hernandez is a local artist and educator. got his MFA at UC Berkeley. Javier got his BA at UC Berkeley, and now all of you three are here at UC Berkeley.
At Cal, we do have Latinx boards, and we do, we are members of them, but are not given the spotlight to discuss important issues that are prevalent in our country. So that's how we came about.
Sorry. I'm sorry, I just didn't want the blue light.
A little bit about myself. My name is Javier. I'm a fourth year. I'm studying business and Latin American studies. I come from the downtown LA region, specifically Koreatown. And that town is known for having a lot of Central Americans. I grew up with Guatemalans, Salvadorians, and Hondureños, as well as Mexicans. I think, my parents are from Guatemala, and growing up, I was a street vendor. And the street vendors are all women, and they're women de El Salvador, Guatemala, y Honduras. So, a funny story I can share is, hay una señora que se llama vende empanadas, so we call her the empanada.
Salvia empanadas?
And so she'll be like, empanadas, rellenitos. So growing up, I would be like, I want an empanada. And cuando fui a Guatemala, I asked for an empanada. For those that don't know what empanadas are, it's plátano plantains filled with either beans or crema. It's like a dessert. So I asked for my empanada, and they give me chicken stuffed in something else, which is not what I wanted. And I'm like, Mom, this is not what I ordered. And she's like, shut the fuck up. So she's like, don't speak because they're gonna know you're not from here. So with that anecdote, I would like to say here, because it was a region mixed with different Central Americans, my slang, I don't catch what is from where. So even then, I'm Guatemalan, but a lot of my slang is also Salvadorian or Hondureño. So, yeah.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Can y'all hear me? No? Can y'all hear me? Yes.
Maybe this one's on.
I'm a fourth year here studying legal studies and ethnic studies. I'm originally from LA. I come from the most southern part of LA County, which is called San Pedro. It's an immigrant community, but most of the immigrants are either from Italy, Croatia, or Mexico. So I didn't really get to grow up around a lot of Central Americans outside of my own family. I think because of that, my family always really stuck to each other and really tried to preserve our culture. They always really instilled that in me. My family is from El Salvador. And so like when I was in school and stuff, I was usually the only Central American. I think in high school there was like 3 others. So yeah, it was hard, but it was nice to have my family, to come to my family, and they're always teaching me my culture and telling me to be proud of it. And coming to Cal was like a really big deal for my family. They were super proud of me. I remember when I got in, we all came to visit, and we bought everyone like Cal merch, and just like a little funny anecdote, we bought my grandparents, we bought them the Mama Bear and Papa Bear Cal shirts, because I call my grandma Mama Sonia and my grandfather Papa Tilo. So yeah, I think maybe that's something Central American or just like Latin American in general, but I refer to my grandparents as Mama and Papa. So yeah, thank you.
Hi y'all, I'm Anna. My name is Anna Rodriguez, and I'm a second year studying gender, women's studies, and social welfare. I'm very nervous, as y'all can tell. But I'm Salvadorian, and I come from LA, Westlake area, so very like Central American for sure. I think coming to Cal for me was also like a big deal. Like living with my grandparents and being raised by them, they weren't sure what Cal is or what Cal is. But I think like my first year I started like really exposing them to like what I'm doing here and why I'm here. So yeah, a funny anecdote is me going to El Salvador when I was like 7 and catching on to a lot of the slang, and we're very like mal hablados, like we cuss a lot. So I remember coming back to LA and like living with like hella Mexicans. They started catching on to the slang, and at first they would make fun of me like some like vos, cipote, things like that. But then they started catching on to it, so it's just funny to see like Mexicans using Salvi slang. So yeah.
I always thought Mexicans were the most badly spoken. You guys have way more flowery language.
Yeah.
Well, hello everybody. My name is Plinio Hernandez and I am a visual artist. I'm also married to Diana, and so I don't know, I feel like thanks for inviting me. Thanks for inviting me, but it's a little cheating. What can I say? I was born in El Salvador. I came two different times. First in '85 and then in '89, finally in '89. But I grew up in the Bay, North Oakland, and then nice city, and then really Berkeley. You know, I went to Berkeley High. I actually studied my master's at UC Berkeley and didn't go do my BA, but I went to LA and I went and lived in Koreatown. And most of my family lives in Torrance, Long Beach, San Pedro, so I totally am vibing with that. And then just LA it was just like, I feel you guys on that, man. But anyways, I don't really have an anecdote. But just I'm happy to be here. Maybe talk a little bit. I might ask you guys a question because I find myself all of a sudden I woke up and I'm the old, like Salvi, you know? I'm like the old vanguard, so, and so to me it's kind of like interesting now, you know? Like I left because of the war, and so I might be some of your parents' age actually, you know, because I have a lot of students now. I teach at a public school in a charter school in Berkeley, and tons of my students are, I think that's my anecdote, tons of my students are Salvadorian and Mexican, and I just love that, you know. I can vibe. I've lived in Mexico a lot. I have a Mexican citizenship residency, and so I can vibe on my Mexi Salvi students really well, and so that might be my anecdote.
Still?
Yeah.
I'll start with the anecdote, kind of like how mal hablados we are. I was in the East Coast, they still not that many Salvis, like in New York. You can hear me without this shit, right? So I went to a community college, and there was a lot of Ecuadorians, and two of them walked out on me, because they were like, this is like a college environment, we don't curse in here. So I was like, fuck, we are hella fucking mal hablados. So that was a learning experience. So now I know that not all Latin Americans curse as much. But I grew up in San Rafael since I was 9, and then I came to college here, and my parents were both mad at me that I didn't major in business or in engineering. They're like, what the fuck are you doing? And then when I told them I was gonna be a historian, and then they're like, ah, fuck. And then when I told them, and then when I told them that I was gonna do writing, they're like, ah, fuck, dude. But it's worked out, and now they're proud of me. They're like my biggest supporters on fucking Instagram and like Facebook, all over the place. So it's worked out. And I'm an only child, so there was that pressure. So. No.
Thank you. Well, the next question I have is, I think that kind of Plinio touched on a little bit, that we sometimes forget that there's different waves, right, of migration, and so I wanted to ask you all if you could just You know, a large part of the Salvadoran diaspora today came during the Civil War, and also the Guatemalan diaspora. And I was just curious if people want to speak on what propelled your particular situation, because it can be different things, if you want to talk about it, or your family's trajectory.
Also, something I wanted to disclaim was that a lot of the cafe founders are citizens because we're the children of the migrants from the Civil War. And now we're also dealing with how do we cater to documented and undocumented members of cafe because of the different waves of migrants. So for myself, my parents are from Guatemala and both came in the mid-'80s, late '80s. I want to say that because our Civil War was of 36 years, starting in the late '60s, my parents' childhood was in Guatemala was affected by the Civil War. So my dad moved from town to town, so he went to Petén, where it's very indigenous populated. There was a genocide in one of the locations where he was residing in, and then he had to relocate. And by the '80s, both my parents' families relocated to the city, which that also brought a different wave of issues. So by the time that they migrated in the late '80s, it was mostly for economic reasons, along with, you know, the Civil War impacts. And they all came here to South Central because there was already a population of Guatemalans and Central Americans there.
For my family, my grandparents were actually the ones to make the trek, following one of my aunts who came to LA and sort of established things. So my grandparents left in '77. It was before the war, but I think a lot of times we don't think about, like, before the war, how, like, the war didn't just happen. Like, a lot went into leading up to that moment. A lot of, like, destabilization and just poverty. I've recently started to ask my grandma more about her story, and she's slowly starting to open up because I feel like she's kind of not talked about that a lot. So they came in '77, and I kind of asked her the reason why, and she was like, well, I don't think my children would have survived if we stayed. They would have, I couldn't feed them, you know, the poverty was extreme. So that's kind of what made them leave. And in '78, my grandma was actually deported. So she went back by herself to El Salvador. Most of her family was still over there. And she actually found out that she was pregnant with my mother. So she decided to hurry up and make the trek, being pregnant, because she wanted my mom to be born here. So I always sort of think that it's a miracle that my mom's alive, because my grandma went through a lot, having to cross 3 borders. Yeah, that's all. Thank you. Similar to Ashley, my grandparents immigrated early '80s because of the Civil War, and also, like, it's tough to have them open up because I feel like it's it's a lot of trauma that they don't want to talk about still because they've been through a lot. But what I did get is that I actually spoke to them earlier this week. So what I did get is they came here because the military was forcing themselves into their homes. So they had, like, this law where families had to give them, like, shelter for the night, and if they didn't, they can risk, like, getting killed by the military. So it wasn't a safe place to be at. So immigration had to happen, and my grandparents came, and then later my mom. So yeah.
So I came in 84 or 85 during, I guess, the midst of the Civil War, but not necessarily because of the Civil War. My sister was born with a heart condition, and we came to Oakland, specifically Children's Hospital in North Oakland, because it was kind of a very important place where heart operations and Children's Hospital are very important in that hospital. Anyways, we came in '85, stayed a few years, went back, renewed visas, and in '89. And when we came back in '89, there was some issues. You used to have to land into LA. There weren't direct flights in the '80s, and so you landed into LA, and that was kind of, immigration. And something was really wrong right away, and our family got separated by customs. And soon we were in a detention center, in a family detention center. My dad was separated from us, and he went to court. We went to court for several weeks, close to a month. And then my dad and I were deported. My sister and my mom got to stay because they had medical visas. In the end, it had to do with the judge saying that our visas were false. My dad, we were kind of, I wouldn't say middle class in El Salvador, but there was some upward mobility, and so in social class. And so I think my dad, like a lot of people with some money, paid for like a visit to the embassy, like a kind of an appointment, and that enough was the cause for deportation. And so I stayed, I think, in El Salvador for a year and a half, studied 4th grade there. It was super important, I think, for me, for my upbringing and kind of for my art practice as well. In the end, we got deported when there was an attempted coup, and there was martial law, so that experience really was embedded in me. And then, subsequently we came up like many other, like Javier came up, my dad and I, but I came accompanied with my dad, and that was like 1990. Right, and then, what was the question about again?
Migration path.
Yeah, and so, I think most of my family, I think my dad and I were really the only ones who came like that. Everybody else pretty much was able to, either get a visa through a family member or residency even before they came. But because I think the family was separated, my parents really wanted to get back together. And in the end, instead of waiting whatever time that the judge had given us, which was 7 years, we cut it short by like a year. And yeah, yeah, that's pretty much it.
Facts, before 1980, there were less than 70,000 Salvadorans in the United States, or something very small. And then by 1992, there were close to 1 million. And El Salvador was a country of 5 million people, in which 20% of the population left in a period of 12 years. There's huge fucking flight of people. And my dad was one of those. He left in 1991. I was born in 1990. He left before I turned 1. And then after that, there was a short, brief period of what you might call peace. And I grew up during that time, which was from 1992 till 1999. And my mom left in 1994, before I turned 5. And like many children of my generation, I grew up without my parents. And I think that's another big theme of why we have given into a lot of gangs, because there's a lot of resentment and a lot of left children who have no parents that they grew up to or look up to. And so they're very easily picked up by the gangs. And so then I left in 1999 by myself, well, with people, but I didn't know them. And that was a very hard trip that has defined my life. But then my trip was also easier than what these immigrants are going through now. And El Salvador that I grew up in wasn't as violent as what it is now. I just went back to my same town in July after 19 years, and I had never been scared to walk around. But everybody has a self-imposed curfew. Nobody goes out after 8 p.m. 5 people were killed when I was there, and a trans woman was killed the week before I got there. And in the news every day, there was another woman being killed, but nobody calls it femicide. And those are the reasons why there's another migration pattern. And that's only the violence. There's also a climate change, and there's drought, and then water, and you're only going to continue to see more and more Central Americans and people from all over the world, from the developing world into the first world, because we're not even talking about climate. And that's my depressing answer to the question.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I think on that note, Bino and I had been thinking about, and one of the things that we've talked about in this class as recently as last week, is how the media creates also particular dichotomies and narratives that become very difficult to move past. And we're seeing this very, very present right now. The big example, right, the migrant caravan and the Trump administration talking about the MS gangs. But this isn't a new narrative, right? It's not a narrative that was created by Number 45. It's a narrative that's being pushed also by the Central American media and the Mexican media. How does this representation inform your lives, your career goals? How might you counter these types of representations in the work that you do, either as educators, writers, those of you who are studying right now? You know, how might you find ways to counter these types of images that have circulated so much? And then I saw a hand over there.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that if there's one mic on, only that one mic will work.
Okay, is it hard to hear?
Is it hard to hear? Okay, so we'll put on that mic. Daniel,
That mic is on still though.
Oh, this one's on? No, it
that
isn't.
one right there. I think that one's on now.
Oh, those are for the, here, I'll just,
That is on.
okay, we'll just leave that one on. Okay, thank you. Whoever wants to start, it doesn't have to be in order, or just has
So-
a thought about it.
Around the caravan, what sorry, well, you can hear me, right? Like, fuck, I feel like, it's very interesting because I feel like we do need to question our countries, meaning El Salvador. I don't think El Salvador is doing shit to care for the Salvadorans there. During the day that a new migrant caravan left from El Salvador, the same day the people running for president, so we have elections in February, had a huge event, and none of them talked about the caravan leaving. Not one of them. So that's a problem. Our presidents have been corrupt and stealing. Each one of them stole 250,000 million during their 5-year presidency. The last 4 presidents that we've had, that's a fucking problem. So those are, I think we can question our governments, but also question this government and what it's doing and its work of creating the immigration problem to begin with the war, funding of the war, and also through economic policy. And the images, the media is very problematic. I feel like Central American immigrants are either children fleeing, or we have to care about the children, or we're gangsters. There's no fucking in between. And around all images of immigration, even here, you're either a fucking extraordinary immigrant who deserves papers, or you're nobody and you don't deserve paper. There's no gray area. And that is the fucking problem that surrounds the entire issue of immigration, which is a very complex issue. Yeah, I'll start there.
Sorry.
I think with the caravana happening in social media, we've seen xenophobic comments just be exacerbated, not just by U.S. citizens, but also by Mexican citizens. And as Central Americans and as children of Central Americans, it's always been ingrained. You know, you're not fully accepted by the U.S. and or Mexico. And as far as Café, we've had more conversations regarding a caravana, what we do, what policies, who could we work with. We had an attorney come in and talk. We just donated some supplies that are supposed to be shipped down to the border this upcoming week. So from the youth, I guess you could say, and from the children of these previously Central American immigrants, I feel like we have a lot of mobilization going on both on the ground and on social media. And yeah, that's what
Yeah, kind of going off what Leonie said, there's a lot of work to be done, and we knew that going into, being a part of Café, but for me personally, just seeing the caravana, and there's been many other caravanas, and just the constant waves of migration that have been happening since the 70s, 80s, and it only seems like it's getting worse. Like, I feel like it's really easy for me as a Central American, US-born person to feel inadequate, like I'm not doing enough. But I think Café is giving me a space to, first of all, be able to exist alongside other Central Americans and talk about these issues, but also giving us the platform and the opportunities to be able to try and do something about it. Because we are in a really high position of privilege, like being at this university, being citizens. So I think right now we've just been trying to figure out what we can do here to help change those narratives, to start making sure that people are doing things to help.
I think that it is important to acknowledge that because we are in a very Mexican-centric university and like campus, our issues aren't really being spoken about, but through like other works that I'm a part of, I've seen how it's changed, especially now. Like there's been, yesterday, Hermanas Unidas donated a lot of supplies, please correct me if I'm wrong. And I want to really thank you for that, because you guys are putting our issues and our people in the forefront. So thank you. And I want to also speak on the misrepresentation of Central Americans and them being all like gang members. I personally was affected by this. My uncle was detained for a petty drug crime, and so I came knocking on his door and took him, and he asked for asylum, and his reason was, if I go back to El Salvador, I'm gonna be killed. So it happened. 20 days into El Salvador, he was killed right in front of our home. So that really affected us, and the fact that we couldn't even go there to his funeral because we were risking our lives as well, because they know that we're his family. So yeah, it's issues that really impact us. So I just want to say that first off, I want to thank other orgs that are putting us and our issues in the forefront. So yeah.
I just remembered there was a poem in your book, I think it was named Chino. He had a tattoo of the Manasana Tucha, but yet he protected him. And so the way that we depict the Central American man is very vicious, but she had a personal story. Myself, I have an older brother who I haven't seen in 8 years, because if he's caught, he'll be deported back to Guatemala. And over there, the sicarios are also looking for him. So just displacing people, he's somewhere in the US and we don't know where he's at. So it's an issue that happens to mixed families. It's an issue that's happening now. And we're on the run here and over there. My brother doesn't belong here or over there.
Oh man. That's heavy, sis. Like I said at the beginning, I'm a high school teacher here in Berkeley, so it's super cool to be kind of in the city that I grew up in, or in the area I grew up in, and be able to be an educator, because that's the only way that although my students are seeing certain representations, they do see a representation in me, you know, and we do have these conversations, you know, and it's an abundant of kids that are half Central American or full Central American at the school, and to me, hablando, speaking in the voz instead of the tú with them. If you were a Spanish speaker, you would understand a little bit of it, but it's just in the just the fact that they can speak to somebody how their parents speak to them really kind of gives them a sense of positive representation, because a lot of these kids do have similar stories to both of you, like I said, also I've lived in Mexico for a while, and during the time in Mexico, I worked in a migrant house in Guadalajara, and my job there was to interview migrants that came in seeking basically humanitarian help, and the organization helped in kind of processing asylum, refugee statuses in Mexico, as well as like basic needs like food, clothing, medical attention, a place to sleep. I was there this summer, we were there this summer, so I worked with the organization about 4 weeks this summer, but like I said, I did it almost 2 years in the past, and that was a very common story. There was like a lot of people, a lot of deportees from the United States that grew up in the United States, like myself, like Javier, and for one reason or the other were deported back to El Salvador. Either they stayed in El Salvador or Central or Guatemala or Honduras. Either they stayed for a very short period of time, or stayed for a month or a year, but the whole time their life was under threat, because usually when you're deported, there's kind of this stereotype when you're deported back that you might be getting deported for some gang issues. And so when you're back, and you're back in these new neighborhoods, your life is threatened. Like, for example, I'm from 2 neighborhoods in San Salvador, in the capital, and one of them is a pretty nice neighborhood. You cross a big avenue where my grandma lives, and it's a neighborhood I need to ask for permission to walk the streets. And it's pretty lame that I have to ask for permission, literally have to ask for permission. And I used to not have to, because my childhood best friend was the big leader in that area. He got assassinated a few years back, but it's a very common thing. So when you're a deportee or you're an American, like a Salvi American, your life is kind of under a microscope. And so a lot of, when I was back to Mexico, when I was in Mexico doing interviews, there was like a lot of people that just couldn't stay in El Salvador and Guatemala and had to leave. Like, they were deported, they stayed in their parents' home or parents' town for a couple of days, a couple of weeks, a couple of months, and then fled to Mexico, because even though Mexico is a place where horrible violence happens to Central Americans, it's still, because of the vast geography of Mexico, it still feels like a safer place for Central Americans. So even though there is all this violence and all this kind of racism or xenophobia in Mexico, a lot of Central Americans are staying, like, it's shooting up, like visas, asylums this year was higher, it was growing exponentially each year, and because, in theory, Mexico, has some really good, like, immigration, asylum things, but because of the corruption, xenophobia, and racism, it really just doesn't function to that extent. Anyways. Anybody else want to add something?
I wanted to open it up, to the folks in the audience. If you could speak up so that the people can hear you in the back. Yeah.
So, like, my question would be, like, in the midst of all these issues, how do you find hope? How do you look at your people or where you came from, where your parents came from, and how do you find hope for them? I think that's my question.
I mean, I'll mention it really quick, and I don't know. I find hope. I mean, as utopic as it may sound, but I do find hope in my students. You know, like I know that they're, and I'll go back to the Central American, Mexican, half Central Mexicans, and I have kids who go to summer vacations in both places. You know, go to their dad's place in Tapetitlan, Jalisco, and then they go to their like mom's pueblo in no sé, Morazan, you know, and so it really happens, and so that's kind of like my way of thinking about it. You know, I go to Mexico a lot. You know, I have a different understanding of Mexico, but that's a certain privilege, of course. You know, being able to have like a passport and not worry. Multiple passports and not worry is just a huge privilege that, of course, I'm like, that's why it's utopic. Anybody?
I think immigrants themselves who make it here, and even just the simple act of immigrating, it's so hard to do that takes some ridiculous amount of hope and belief to think that you're fleeing something so fucked up and that the next step you're going to take is going to be a safer one. I find it in immigrants themselves, like my family, there's hope once people make it here. Like, the statistics, time and time again, like disprove the fucking media and like every conservative voice. Wherever immigrants move, crime goes down. Productivity goes up, the economy goes better. You just look, everybody uses Utica, New York as a representative model from like the 90s. They took refugees from the Balkans, from Central America, and because they were suffering a lot from crime, and that shit dropped. And Utica, New York is doing perfect, like it's doing great. But no conservative is ever gonna tell you that. None of them are actually gonna look at the facts. So immigrants are resilient as fuck, and just ask any immigrant, and if they're comfortable opening up about their story, your jaws are gonna drop. Ask your parents, you know, and I find hope in those stories.
For me, I find hope through my grandma, because even though she lost her son in El Salvador, she still has the willpower to keep going. So through her, and as right now, like through the children and the women and like just everyone trying to immigrate to here, it just shows a lot of resiliency. Like even though they're putting up with so much shit, they're still coming. Like they're coming and they're like powering through. So hope through them.
I also find hope in my family and my community. I found from my own experience with my family and from the Central Americans I've met, there's just this, I guess you could say, humility and compassion that it's hard for me to find or to relate in the same way that I do with Central Americans. I guess on campus, GAFED has helped me a lot. My first few years here, I wasn't really involved in anything, and I just felt out of place. So coming into the GAFED space and meeting all the people, like, it's just given me so much hope that despite everything that we and our families have been through, we're here somehow, and we're doing whatever we can to speak out for our communities and to ensure our voices are being heard, because we're erased too often. So yeah, just being able to be with my community. I would echo what a lot of people said here, either my family or the community. I know here at Casamont, I think it's a high school. Casamont High School has been really impacted by these migrant kids. A lot of them are Honduran. And I think at the end of this month, they're having an event called Mi Casa Tu Casa. And the students are working together to collect money to raise for the food. And they'll be having food that's from their country. So little events like this, whether it's solidarity from, fellow organizations on campus, just getting the conversation going, because even though there has been xenophobic comments online and with the whole Caravana coverage, we also see solidarity come through. The indigenous communities in Mexico have been supporting the Caravana a lot. So yes, there's a lot of bad, but there's also a lot of good. I think that's about it. I know in Guatemala specifically, after the volcano erupted earlier this year, my sister has a foundation called Misión Guatemala, and she was able to raise over $30,000 to give back to the communities, and now she has a documentary. So whether it's giving supplies or telling the story from the voices of the actual people living through these atrocities, that's what I've seen. That's what gives me hope. Also, sorry, this class, because this is the first class that has ever spoken about Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Central America, beyond 1954 advance or the civil wars, So thank you for having that space too.
I wanted you to expand a little bit more about when you're saying a lot of deportees, when they return to El Salvador, they're under scrutiny.
Yes.
And I was wondering who they're under scrutiny by, and also after you're deported, you lose like a sense of belonging from the U.S. And then if you're under scrutiny in El Salvador, you have a sense of belonging there. So how do you react in that situation?
There's a lot of stories, there is a lot of scrutiny, and that scrutiny kind of happens because people have been gone. Let's say somebody migrated to the United States and lived here for 10 years, maybe came when they were 10 and deported when they were 20. What happens is they go back to their parents' community that's totally changed, because of the gangs. And so what happens is they're not recognized by the gangs, and unless someone still exists from that area. So what happens is usually there's a lot of pressure on them, and since he's a deportee, gang members or the criminal elements believe that they have the capability of getting money off of him by saying your life will be under danger if your family doesn't supply us with a monthly rent. My family owns a restaurant for like 50 years in San Salvador, a pretty large restaurant, and it pays a monthly rent to the gangs, and so it's a big safety net for a lot of reasons, because my aunties and uncles and cousins go back pretty often, and so that kind of insecurity, because you're paying somebody you don't really know, that might just it feels like they could switch on you at any moment. Maybe there's a code or something, but it really feels insecure. So when these people get deported back to their city, they're really threatened, either by the police too. Police are like, why were you deported? Because they want to know if they were deported for gang issues. And so, I've heard stories since I've interviewed people. I heard stories from them, getting kind of kidnapped by police and taken out to to get murdered or something, and somehow escaping. And the same for that same person, gangs doing the same thing for that person,
It just reminded me a little of that story of that one friend, and how when he went to the police to tell the police that he had seen a crime, that the police put his lip down.
And he had the gang.
And he had the gang. And so it's like there's also like a blurry line, right?
There's a blurry line.
Because the gangsters, just like we've seen here and in Mexico, so.
And there's another thing that I would add is that there's a lot of unreporting that goes on, and only one newspaper that's truly bipartisan in El Salvador, El Faro.net, has actually like talked about this, that there's a rebirth of death squads of police. While they're not working, they go out and just round up people, and oftentimes they're not even gangsters, and they're just young men with tattoos or with earrings. Like I wear earrings and I have a tattoo. When I was there, I took my earring off and I always wore everything else, because it's at that level that you have to police yourself, and everything goes block by block. And this is like, I went back uncertain whether I was gonna stay there, because I haven't been in that country for 19 years. Everything has changed. I was lucky enough that my cousin is there. She's like 5 years younger than me. So she was like my guide, and she was like, don't go here, don't go there. And it's like block by block. And so there's always eyes on you. There's little kids who are like orejas, like ears, that are listening to see where you come from, how long are you gonna be there, how much money you have, etc. So that's why people are fleeing. It's like everybody's constantly watching you. And the most dangerous age to be is from like 12 to 25. It doesn't matter how you look, if you have tattoos or not, but those are the highest murder rate demographics in my country.
Those were the highest rates in the Civil War, too.
Yeah.
Javier?
Or it was, I'm sorry, there was a gentleman who wanted.
Oh, sorry, yes.
Yeah, I was wondering, you sort of answered the question, but I was wondering.
Can you speak up so they can hear you?
Yeah, sorry. I think you sort of answered my question, but like, I was wondering, like, how do they know, like, this information about you? Like, when you go back, like, how do they know, like, if, like, you were, say, like, deported, or, like, whether you're just, like, out of town?
It's just anybody that goes in.
Well, the thing is, like, when you're, growing up in the United States, you know, like, for example, I grew up in Berkeley, you know, pretty in the 80s and 90s, West Berkeley, so the area near closest down San Pablo, down University, was a working class community of a lot of Mexican and African American people. There was two pretty prominent gangs. There's still every now and then like the 1 or 2 murders a year that still happen because in that area, you know? But in the 80s and 90s, if I walked into that area, someone would be like, hey, where you from, fool? Like, that would be like the thing easily. I mean, I grew up in that, so I remember hearing that, like, where you from? And so, when you're in these neighborhoods in El Salvador, someone comes up to you and say, where are you from? And, you know, it's a very common thing. That's why I say when I'm in my neighborhood in El Salvador, I have to ask for permission to where my cousins live. I literally have to ask for permission, you know? Yes, I could go walk, and yes, that day they could all be indoors and nothing can happen, but I just, like, I'm not gonna. And I used to not have to, you know? Like I said, there was a point in time where, like, my friends controlled that neighborhood, or my childhood friends, not my friends, but. And so it was, in a way, there was some safety, but I still had to go to him and be like, I'm about to walk down, all right? You know? Yeah. He's like, all right.
And also, like, as a poet, or like, I'm very interested in language and culture. We think that, you know, culture is stagnant, but no, it keeps on growing even once you remove somebody out of there. Like, Salvadoran culture is going to continue to evolve. And it's actually, speech has gotten more Mexicanized, and so slang is different. So you take somebody that is not familiar with that, they're gonna give themselves away just by the way that they talk, by the way that they dress. Things have changed, and so you stand out. Whether you know it or not, you stand out.
You
have a huge
language is a big thing, you know.
Like my slang, even like Salvadorans here never call me out, but once I went back to El Salvador and read some poems, they're like, you're like 90s, like capsule, like gang. Like slang. I know. That's like. My slang is whack now, you know? It has changed. People don't talk like that anymore. You know? So shit like that, you know?
Come by in the back, yeah.
What were some of the primary motives that made you leave the country to pursue like the American dream? And have you been disappointed, or what were some of the perspectives now living here in the United States? What has been the American dream like?
Oh, I don't know, maybe for your parents.
I want to say, for me, what I think personally is that the American dream doesn't really exist.
Woo!
Yeah. Bible. Yeah. Doesn't exist for us, for our families.
It doesn't exist, but I've been trying to like figure out what the fuck it is, and I think part of it is just the false sense of safety, especially for my family, for myself. Me going back to El Salvador this time around, growing up here, I didn't grow up in the best neighborhood, but I was never fucking scared for my life. I was never woken up multiple times during the day because somebody got shot. And in the United States, it's still, depending how you look, your safety gauge is one way, but not as much as it is now currently in this day and age as it is in Central America. And that's why people are fleeing. And I think that is part of not the American dream, but the American way. Even though you still have, just this morning, there was a mass shooting. But statistically, that's still way lower than the highest murder rate in the world, which are all found in Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. So I think that's what immigrating here provides, just safety, or the mirage, or whatever you want to fucking call it, safety.
We just have 5 more minutes, and I want to just give people a chance to, if there's any closing words. I don't know if there's another question, but I think it was a huge privilege to be able to read you, Javier, and have you here today. And I hope that people are inspired to find different ways to communicate.
And also, is the East Bay Sanctuary still doing work? That's literally a block away. If you're so fucking compelled that you want to help out, they always need volunteers. And you also have a lot of organizations in Oakland and in the Mission that are still doing work and need people to volunteer, because this caravan is coming and people are going to continue to fucking immigrate. And so they need translators, they need people to do the work. So do that shit.
And also in regards, jumping on that, like I said, I've worked extensively with organizations, migrant houses in Mexico. So, contact Diana, anybody who wants to, and I'll put you guys in contact. You can go for a summer, they have housing. A lot of these places have housing. Volunteers come from all over the place. I have direct contact with Guadalajara with several other ones, and so it's also a way to engage. If you are, whoever you are. I mean, I've met someone I went to school with at one of these things, because I was like, what the hell, didn't you go to Berkeley High, and people from everywhere, from Germany, Africa, go and volunteer. So if you're wanting to, you're thinking that could be something you want to do in the summer, let Diana know, and I'll put you in contact.
Cafe, any parting words?
Just thank you for having us here and for making this space, not only for us as an organization, but as Central Americans, and keeping us updated on what's going on, and letting us know that there's more than one side to any story.
And talk to your parents.
Yeah,
take this conversation to your fucking families. Especially if you're not Central American. Especially.
So on that note of thanking Diana, Iyari and I brought her some flowers, and your Professor Diana, we made a little card for her. But we made a little card because Diana's gonna have her first book published, and
They told me I have to change the title.
Colores Mexicanos, but they might.
It's too Spanglish. It needs to be more
English.
Sorry, I know you guys have had to suffer through my bilingualism.
But yeah.
Thank you. I think we have a couple more minutes too to say that this is, as a Mexican woman, it is, and I think there's more Mexican students in this class than Central Americans. It's very easy to think that, that our story is the story of the rest of the hemisphere, and I've learned a lot, and we have a mixed hemispheric family, and I think that these are stories that are very complex, and when you have families and increasingly in the United States, we're not a monolithic country. None of us really have monolithic families. So I think taking these stories to our families and to our friends and to our workplaces are really important, because these aren't simple stories. And the caravan is not a simple matter. And hopefully this news that we'll hear about tomorrow.
Yeah, and fuck 45.
Thank you, class.
I can say
Thank
it.
you, Javier.